Hey, blonde girl, think you're some kind of Rambo or something?
Captain Reynolds sneered, his voice steady but dripping with disdain as he slammed his hand down on the cold metal table. The sound echoed through the cramped interrogation room, deep within SEAL Team 6's compound. Harsh fluorescent lights cast shadows across the woman sitting opposite him. Blonde, curly hair tied in a messy high bun, a few loose curls framing her face. Porcelain skin dotted with light freckles, blue-gray eyes staring straight ahead without a trace of fear. She wore a fitted light gray t-shirt, dark military pants, and worn brown combat boots. Metal handcuffs locked tight around her wrists, but her posture remained straight as a steel rod. On her shoulder, a small tear in the fabric revealed a glimpse of black ink from what appeared to be a flame tattoo. Two of my guards are unconscious at the gate. Security cameras went dark for exactly 37 seconds. The alarm system didn't even have time to sound. Reynolds stared intently into those blue eyes. "Who are you? Spy? Terrorist?" The woman remained silent, her gaze never leaving his face. The only sound in this sealed room was the slow rotation of the ceiling fan overhead. Reynolds let out a bitter laugh. "Silent treatment, huh? Think you're tough? I'll show you why they call me Hammer." But what Captain Reynolds didn't know was that in 18 minutes, he would be the one trembling and apologizing. The interrogation room felt smaller with each passing second. Steel walls painted institutional green, a two-way mirror that reflected nothing but Reynolds' growing frustration, and a single camera blinking red in the corner. The woman, according to the preliminary report, going by the name Raven Lawson, hadn't moved a muscle since being seated. Her breathing remained steady, controlled, almost meditative. Reynolds circled the table like a predator sizing up prey. At 6'4", 220 pounds of pure muscle earned through 15 years of elite military service, he was used to intimidating suspects into compliance. His camouflage uniform bore the insignia of a decorated officer, chest full of ribbons that told stories of courage under fire. The scar running from his left temple to his jaw served as a permanent reminder of Fallujah, where he had earned his reputation as someone who got results. "Let me paint you a picture, sweetheart," Reynolds said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "At 0200 hours, our perimeter sensors detected an intrusion. By the time my team responded, 2 highly trained Navy SEALs were down for the count. No shots fired, no weapons discharged, no signs of struggle. Just 2 elite operators unconscious in the dirt." He paused, studying her face for any reaction. Nothing. Security footage shows a figure approximately your height and build approaching the main gate. Then, poof, the cameras go black. When they come back online 37 seconds later, you're already inside the compound, walking toward the command center like you own the place. Raven's eyes flickered almost imperceptibly toward the camera in the corner, then back to Reynolds. The movement was so subtle that anyone else would have missed it, but Reynolds caught it, his jaw tightened. "You see something interesting up there?" He followed her gaze to the camera. "Don't worry about being recorded. This conversation is completely off the books. No lawyers, no oversight, just you and me having a friendly chat about national security." For the first time since entering the room, Raven spoke. Her voice was soft, almost melodic, with a slight rasp that suggested someone who had spent time shouting orders over gunfire and helicopter rotors. "Not everyone who carries a gun knows how to use it." The words hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Reynolds' face flushed red, his hands clenching into fists. The casual dismissal in her tone, the way she delivered the line without even looking at him, it was calculated disrespect of the highest order. "Is that so?" Reynolds reached for the SIG M17 holstered at his hip, drawing it in one smooth motion. The metallic click of the safety being disengaged seemed unnaturally loud in the confined space. "Let me show you exactly how well I know my weapons." He stepped around the table, positioning himself directly in front of her, and pressed the cold barrel against her forehead. The gun trembled slightly, not from fear or uncertainty, but from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. This was the moment where suspects broke, where tough facades crumbled under the weight of imminent death. Raven didn't even blink. Her blue eyes remained fixed on his, studying him with the detached interest of a scientist observing a lab specimen. If anything, she seemed almost bored by the threat. "Problem with intimidation," she said quietly, "is that it only works on people who have something to lose." Before Reynolds could process the implications of that statement, the heavy steel door burst open. Intelligence Officer Martinez entered without invitation, his polished dress shoes clicking against the concrete floor. At 5'8" with the lean build of a desk jockey, Martinez represented everything Reynolds despised about the modern military. Too much education, not enough dirt under the fingernails. "Captain," Martinez said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who answered directly to brass that outranked everyone in the building. "We need to discuss the situation." Reynolds kept the gun pressed against Raven's forehead, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm in the middle of getting answers, Martinez. This can wait." "I'm afraid it can't." Martinez approached the table, tablet in hand, his demeanor suggesting he'd rather be anywhere else. "The prisoner's identity is complicated." "What's complicated about it? Her name is Raven Lawson. She's a terrorist who infiltrated our base, and she's about to tell us everything she knows." Martinez cleared his throat uncomfortably. "That's the problem, sir. Raven Lawson doesn't exist." The words hit the room like a flashbang grenade. Reynolds' gun hand wavered slightly as he processed the information. "What do you mean, doesn't exist?" "No birth certificate, no social security number, no passport, no digital footprint of any kind. The name appears in exactly 0 databases. As far as the United States government is concerned, this woman was never born." Raven's lips curved into the faintest suggestion of a smile. "Careful, Martinez. You're starting to ask the right questions." Martinez nearly dropped his tablet. "How do you know my name? I never introduced myself." "Staff Sergeant Diego Martinez, Intelligence Corps, serial number 749-88-5567. Graduated summa cum laude from Georgetown, recruited straight out of college, assigned to cyber warfare analysis before transferring to human intelligence. Your wife Maria is pregnant with your first child, a daughter you plan to name Isabella after your grandmother." The silence that followed was absolute. Martinez's face had gone white as printer paper, his hands visibly shaking as he struggled to comprehend how a prisoner could possibly know such intimate details about his life. Reynolds pressed the gun harder against Raven's skull. "How the hell do you know that information?" "I know a lot of things," Raven replied evenly, "including the fact that your weapon has a round chambered, but the magazine is only loaded with 14 rounds instead of the standard 17. You've been practicing quick draws in the mirror of your quarters, haven't you, Captain? Trying to recreate that scene from your favorite action movie, the one where the hero intimidates the bad guy into talking." Reynolds' face cycled through confusion, recognition, and then something approaching terror. She was right. He had been practicing quick draws, something he'd never admitted to anyone, and the magazine count was accurate down to the exact number. "Lucky guess," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Third drawer of your desk contains a letter you've written and rewritten 47 times to the family of Corporal Henderson, the soldier who died under your command in Syria. You can't bring yourself to send it because you know that words can't bring their son back, and deep down, you blame yourself for the decision that got him killed." This time, Reynolds actually stumbled backward, the gun dropping from Raven's forehead. The letter was real, hidden exactly where she said it would be, written exactly as she described. The guilt over Henderson's death was something that haunted his every waking moment, and several sleeping ones as well. "Who are you?" he whispered. Before Raven could answer, another voice cut through the tension. "That's what I'd like to know." If you're feeling that same frustration watching someone get completely underestimated, smash that like button right now. Subscribe, because stories like this remind us that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one nobody expects. And hey, I'm curious. Where are you watching this from? Are you tuned in from the US, UK, Canada, or somewhere else entirely? Drop your country in the comments, because I love seeing our global community come together for these incredible stories of hidden strength. The new arrival commanded attention simply by existing. Former SEAL Jackson Williams stood in the doorway, his massive frame filling the space completely. At 6'6" and built like a linebacker, Jackson represented 30 years of military service and hard-earned wisdom. Graying hair cropped in a regulation cut, steel gray eyes that had seen too much combat, and a presence that made even battle-hardened officers straighten their posture. "Gentlemen," Jackson said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "I suggest you step away from the prisoner." Reynolds found his voice, though it cracked slightly. "Master Chief, this is a classified interrogation. You don't have clearance for—" "Son," Jackson interrupted, his gaze never leaving Raven's face, "I've got clearance for things that would keep you awake at night. Now, lower your weapon and step back." There was something in Jackson's tone, not quite recognition, but a growing suspicion that made him approach the table with unusual caution. His eyes were fixed on Raven with an intensity that suggested he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Ma'am," Jackson said formally, "would you mind looking at me?" Raven turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze directly. The moment their eyes locked, Jackson's composure cracked. His face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally something approaching awe. "Sweet mother of—" He caught himself before completing the phrase. "It can't be." "Hello, Jackson," Raven said quietly. "It's been a while." Martinez looked between them frantically. "You two know each other? This is highly irregular. Master Chief, if you have information about this prisoner, you're required to—" "Martinez," Jackson said without taking his eyes off Raven, "I need you to run a very specific search in the classified database. Look for Operation Neptune's Fork, August 2011. Sir, I don't have clearance for operations from that time period. Then get someone who does. And Martinez—" Jackson's voice carried a warning that made the intelligence officer take an involuntary step backward. "Whatever you find in that file, you keep to yourself until I say otherwise. Understood?" Martinez nodded mutely and hurried from the room, leaving Reynolds and Jackson alone with their mysterious prisoner. The atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Where moments before it had been a straightforward interrogation, now it felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into an abyss that might stare back. Reynolds holstered his weapon, but remained tense, ready to draw again at a moment's notice. "Master Chief, what the hell is going on here? Who is this woman?" Jackson didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked around the table slowly, studying Raven from different angles, like an art critic examining a masterpiece. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Operation Neptune's Fork was a classified extraction mission in Afghanistan. 6 operators went in to recover a high-value target from Taliban custody. It was supposed to be a routine snatch and grab. He paused, his hands clenching and unclenching unconsciously. 5 operators never made it home. Raven's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Pain, perhaps, or the weight of old memories. The official report listed all 6 operators as killed in action, Jackson continued. Bodies recovered, families notified, flags folded and presented. Closed casket funerals because the remains were compromised. Reynolds felt ice forming in his stomach. And one of those operators was the team leader, codenamed Ghost 01. The most lethal soldier I ever had the privilege of serving alongside. Jackson's voice grew thick with emotion. I was the one who had to tell her commanding officer that she was dead. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Reynolds looked back and forth between Jackson and Raven, trying to process the implications of what he was hearing. "That's impossible," Reynolds said. "You're telling me this woman is a dead Navy SEAL?" "I'm telling you," Jackson replied, "that if this is who I think it is, then we just held a gun to the head of the most decorated special operations soldier in modern military history." Raven spoke for the first time since Jackson had entered the room. 6 went in, Jackson. Only 1 came out. But that one carried 5 bodies 18 miles through hostile territory to make sure everyone came home, even if they couldn't walk out on their own. Jackson's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. "Ma'am, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer truthfully. During Operation Neptune's Fork, what was the extraction code phrase?" "Angels don't abandon their own." Jackson dropped to one knee, his massive frame somehow making the gesture look natural rather than submissive. "Ghost 01, ma'am. Permission to formally recognize your return to active status." The moment stretched like a taut wire, tension building to a breaking point. Reynolds felt like he was watching something sacred and terrible unfold, a reunion between warriors forged in fire and blood. The casual disrespect he'd shown earlier now seemed not just inappropriate, but potentially career-ending. "Jackson," Raven said softly, "stand up. That's not who I am anymore." "Ma'am, with respect, that's exactly who you are. A warrior doesn't stop being a warrior just because the war changes." Before anyone could respond, the door burst open again. This time, it was security technician Sarah Williams, a 25-year-old analyst whose primary job involved monitoring the base's extensive surveillance network. She burst into the room with the urgency of someone carrying life-or-death information. "Captain Reynolds," she said breathlessly, "we have a problem. The prisoner's biometric scan just triggered something in the classified database." Reynolds was getting tired of surprises. What kind of something? Sarah glanced nervously at Raven, then back at Reynolds. Sir, the system is showing a clearance level I've never seen before. Level 0. The computer won't even tell me what that means. Just keeps flashing insufficient authorization every time I try to access the file. Jackson and Raven exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Reynolds felt like he was standing in the middle of a conversation, conducted in a language he didn't understand. Sarah, Reynolds said carefully, who has level 0 clearance? That's the thing, sir. According to every manual I can find, level 0 doesn't exist. The highest clearance in our system is level 3, and that's reserved for Joint Chiefs and cabinet members. But the computer is insisting that level 0 is real, and that our prisoner has it. Reynolds sank into one of the metal chairs, suddenly feeling every one of his 42 years. The situation was spiraling beyond his control, moving into territory that required expertise he didn't possess. Reynolds utilized professional-grade surveillance equipment, including high-definition cameras with 4K resolution, studio-quality audio recording capabilities, and artificial intelligence-powered facial recognition systems. This technology was originally developed for advanced military installations, but now businesses and homes could access it affordably. The system could detect unusual movement patterns and send immediate alerts via smartphone, ensuring absolute security. Sarah, Jackson said, I need you to step outside and make sure we're not disturbed for the next 10 minutes. Can you do that? Yes, Master Chief, but no questions. Just keep everyone out until I give you the all clear. Sarah nodded and hurried from the room, leaving the three of them alone again. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Reynolds finally found his voice. Okay, I'll bite. If you really are this Ghost 01 person, what are you doing here? Why infiltrate our base? Why allow yourself to be captured? Raven studied him for a long moment before answering. Because someone needs to evaluate whether SEAL Team 6 is still capable of protecting this country's interests. Whether the next generation of operators can handle the kinds of threats that don't make it into the official reports. And, Reynolds asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer, so far, I'm not impressed. The words hit like a physical blow. Reynolds had dedicated his entire adult life to serving his country, had sacrificed relationships, health, and peace of mind in pursuit of excellence. To be found wanting by someone he'd been holding at gunpoint minutes earlier was almost too much to process. How do we know you're telling the truth? Reynolds demanded. Anyone can claim to be a dead hero. Where's your proof? Instead of answering directly, Raven did something unexpected. She reached into her pocket with her cuffed hands and withdrew a small object, placing it carefully on the table between them. It was a challenge coin, a military tradition dating back generations, small medallions given to recognize exceptional service or mark special operations. This particular coin was unlike anything Reynolds had ever seen. Matte black metal inscribed with a single flame symbol, no words or identifying marks. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly military issue, but bearing no resemblance to any unit coin in Reynolds' experience. Jackson picked up the coin with reverent hands, turning it over slowly. His face had gone pale. Where did you get this? Jackson asked quietly. It was issued to me upon completion of Ghost Unit training. Only 6 were ever made. And the other 5? Raven's voice became barely audible. I carry them too. They belong to my team. Jackson's hands were trembling as he examined the coin more closely. Under a certain angle, additional markings became visible. Serial numbers, dates, and symbols that meant nothing to Reynolds, but clearly held deep significance for the older SEAL. This is authentic, Jackson said finally. The flame symbol, the serial number, even the weight of the metal. This coin was issued by Ghost Unit Command, and there's no way to fake it. The manufacturing process is classified beyond most people's clearance level. Reynolds felt the last of his skepticism crumbling. So, what happens now? Now, a new voice said from the doorway, we follow proper protocol. Everyone turned to see Martinez returning, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a man in civilian clothes who radiated authority despite his casual appearance. Late 50s, silver hair, eyes that missed nothing. His posture screamed military officer even without a uniform. Gentlemen, the newcomer said, I'm Colonel Patterson, and I think it's time we had a very serious conversation. The tension is building, and you can feel something big is about to drop. If you're getting those chills, hit subscribe and ring that notification bell, because when this reveal hits, you're going to want to share it with everyone you know. Trust me, this is just the beginning. Colonel Patterson's presence changed the entire dynamic of the room. Where moments before there had been confusion and growing recognition, now there was the crisp efficiency of military protocol being properly observed. He surveyed the scene with professional detachment, Reynolds standing awkwardly by his chair, Jackson still holding the challenge coin, and Raven sitting calmly in her handcuffs as if this were exactly what she'd expected to happen. "Master Chief Williams," Patterson said formally, "please step back from the prisoner." Jackson complied immediately, but his eyes never left Raven's face. The colonel approached the table with measured steps, each movement calculated and precise. When he spoke again, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I need you to answer them completely and truthfully. Do you understand?" Raven nodded slightly. "State your name and rank." "Sarah Elizabeth Chen, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy, serial number—" "That will suffice, Ben," Patterson interrupted. "What is your current operational status?" "Reactivated under Ghost Protocol Directive 77 Alpha, effective 72 hours ago." Patterson's expression didn't change, but Reynolds noticed his hands clench slightly. Whatever Ghost Protocol was, it clearly carried significant weight. "Authorization for current mission?" "Direct order from JSOC Command, classified under Special Access Program Titan. Mission parameters: evaluate readiness and security protocols of forward-deployed SEAL teams through controlled infiltration exercise." The room erupted. Reynolds jerked upright like he'd been shocked, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and mortification. "You're telling me this was a test? That I just held a gun to the head of a superior officer during a sanctioned military exercise?" "Captain Reynolds," Patterson said sharply, "you will maintain proper bearing." But Reynolds was beyond caring about proper bearing. The implications of what he'd done, what he'd said, how he'd acted, were crashing down on him like an avalanche. He'd threatened a decorated officer, used inappropriate force during an interrogation, and violated about 15 different regulations in the space of 20 minutes. "Sir," Reynolds said, his voice barely under control, "I need to state for the record that I had no knowledge this was an exercise. My actions were based on the information available at the time, which suggested a genuine security breach." "Noted," Patterson replied curtly. "Ma'am, please continue with your mission brief." Raven's voice remained steady, professional. "Primary objective: assess base security through unauthorized entry. Secondary objective: evaluate personnel response to unknown threats. Tertiary objective: test information security and classification protocols under stress." Jackson found his voice. "And our performance?" For the first time since entering the room, Raven's expression showed something approaching emotion, disappointment mixed with concern. Base security was compromised within 8 minutes of initial approach. Perimeter sensors detected intrusion, but response protocols were inadequate. Guard positions were predictable, rotation schedules followed patterns observable through open-source intelligence, and reaction times suggested insufficient training for unconventional threats. She paused, letting the criticism sink in before continuing. Personnel response showed tactical competence but significant gaps in threat assessment. Captain Reynolds defaulted to intimidation rather than intelligence gathering, potentially compromising valuable information sources. Intelligence Officer Martinez demonstrated proper protocol but insufficient clearance for the situation at hand. Master Chief Williams showed appropriate recognition protocols and proper respect for chain of command. Reynolds felt like he was being dissected with surgical precision. Every mistake, every poor decision, every moment of unprofessional conduct was being cataloged with clinical detachment. "What about information security?" Patterson asked. "Catastrophic failure. Classified information was discussed in the presence of unauthorized personnel, recording equipment was left active during sensitive conversations, and proper clearance verification was not conducted before revealing operational details." The silence that followed was the kind that precedes explosions. Patterson's face had taken on the expression of someone calculating exactly how many careers were about to end. In military settings, comprehensive protection systems designed for high-risk personnel included specialized insurance packages with preferential rates and exclusive benefits. Long-term investment plans and retirement funds were specifically created for defense personnel, featuring preferential interest rates and special benefits. These financial plans not only protected the individual, but also ensured family security in all situations, from mission-related injuries to early retirement planning. "Ma'am," Patterson said finally, "your assessment of corrective measures required, complete review of base security protocols, mandatory retraining for all personnel involved in threat response, and implementation of proper classification verification procedures. Additionally, I recommend psychological evaluation for Captain Reynolds to determine fitness for continued service in sensitive positions." The words hit Reynolds like physical blows. His career, his reputation, his entire identity as a military officer, everything was crashing down around him because he had failed a test he didn't even know he was taking. "Sir," Reynolds said desperately, "permission to speak?" Patterson nodded curtly. "Ma'am," Reynolds addressed Raven directly, "I formally apologize for my conduct during this exercise. My actions were unprofessional and inappropriate. I accept full responsibility for my failures and submit myself for whatever disciplinary action is deemed appropriate." Raven studied him for a long moment, her blue eyes seeming to weigh his words, his sincerity, and perhaps his potential for redemption. "Captain," she said finally, "do you understand why this exercise was necessary?" Reynolds thought carefully before answering. "To identify weaknesses in our security and training before they could be exploited by actual enemies." "Correct. And do you understand why those weaknesses are dangerous?" "Because they could result in American casualties and mission failures." "Also correct." Raven leaned forward slightly, the handcuffs restricting her movement, but not her intensity. "The threats facing this country are evolving, Captain. Our enemies are studying us, learning our patterns, identifying our vulnerabilities. They don't announce themselves with traditional uniforms or conventional tactics. They look like civilians, they think like soldiers, and they strike when we least expect it." She paused, letting the lesson sink in. "Your first instinct when confronted with an unknown threat was to assert dominance through intimidation. That approach might work against traditional adversaries, but it fails completely against someone who's been trained to expect and counter such tactics. A real enemy would have used your aggression against you, potentially compromising this entire facility." Reynolds nodded slowly, beginning to understand the scope of his mistakes. "What should I have done differently?" "Information gathering first, threat assessment second, measured response third. You assumed I was hostile without confirming the threat level. You revealed operational details without verifying my clearance status. Most importantly, you allowed emotion to drive your decision-making process." The critique was devastating, but fair. Reynolds could see exactly how his actions had played into potential enemy hands, how his anger and frustration had been weaponized against him. Before anyone could respond, Sarah Williams burst through the door again, her face flushed with excitement and confusion. "Colonel Patterson," she said breathlessly, "the database search is complete. Sir, you need to see this immediately." Patterson stepped aside as Sarah approached with a tablet displaying classified information. Whatever she'd found caused his expression to shift from professional concern to something approaching shock. "Master Chief," Patterson said slowly, "you were correct about Operation Neptune's Fork. According to this file, all 6 operators were listed as killed in action on August 15th, 2011. He scrolled through additional information, his face growing paler with each revelation. "However, there's a discrepancy in the casualty reports. 5 bodies were recovered and returned to the United States for burial. The 6th," he looked directly at Raven, "the 6th was listed as remains unrecoverable due to enemy action." Jackson's voice was barely audible. "Because she carried the others out." "According to the classified after-action report," Patterson continued, "the team leader conducted a solo extraction operation lasting 17 hours under continuous enemy fire. She recovered 5 fallen teammates and transported them 18 miles to the extraction point, sustaining multiple injuries in the process." He set down the tablet and looked at Raven with something approaching awe. The official cause of death was listed as catastrophic injuries sustained during heroic recovery operation. Medical reports indicated survival was impossible, given the extent of trauma documented at the extraction site. Raven's voice was quiet but clear. The medical reports were accurate. Sarah Elizabeth Chen died in that helicopter on the way to Germany. The person sitting here is someone else entirely. The philosophical implications of her statement hung in the air like smoke. How do you classify someone who had officially died, been buried and mourned, but who was clearly sitting alive in front of them. "Ma'am," Reynolds said, his voice heavy with newfound respect, "who are you now?" "I'm the person responsible for making sure other teams don't face the same impossible choices mine did. I'm the ghost who watches the watchers, who tests the testers, who reminds everyone that in this business, there's no such thing as routine." She looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes in turn. "I'm the reason you'll never again assume you know everything about a situation based on appearances alone. Hold up, before we get to the moment that changes everything. If you're on the edge of your seat right now, this is your last chance to hit that like button. What's about to happen will blow your mind, and you'll want to come back and watch this again." The atmosphere in the room had transformed completely. Where an hour ago there had been a routine interrogation of a suspected terrorist, now there was a gathering of military professionals grappling with the presence of a living legend. Reynolds found himself studying Raven with new eyes, trying to reconcile the slight woman in handcuffs with the superhuman figure described in classified reports. "Ma'am," Jackson said, "may I ask about the others, your team?" Raven's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "They were good soldiers, Jackson. They deserved better than the situation we walked into." "The mission parameters were classified above my clearance level," Jackson said. "All I knew was that 6 of our best went in, and none came out. Taliban intelligence was better than our briefing suggested. What was supposed to be a sterile environment turned into a hornet's nest. We accomplished the primary objective. The high-value target was extracted successfully, but the cost was higher than anyone anticipated." She paused, her eyes distant, as if seeing something beyond the walls of the interrogation room. "Rodriguez took a sniper round while covering our approach to the extraction zone. Clean shot, center mass, no chance of survival. Williams stepped on an IED during our fighting withdrawal. She saved 4 of us by absorbing the blast with her own body. Thompson and Martinez were killed by artillery during our final defensive position, holding the line so I could complete the extraction." The clinical precision of her after-action report couldn't disguise the pain underneath. These weren't just statistics or tactical assessments. They were friends, comrades, family members who had died under her command. "And Henderson?" Jackson asked quietly. "Henderson stayed with me until the end. Took 2 rounds in the chest during the final approach to the landing zone, but refused medical evacuation until all the bodies were accounted for. She died in my arms on the helicopter, asking me to make sure her daughter knew she was a hero." The room fell silent, except for the mechanical hum of the air conditioning system. The weight of their sacrifice seemed to press down on everyone present, a reminder of the price paid for freedom by those who volunteered to stand watch in dangerous places. Reynolds cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ma'am, the psychological evaluation you recommended for me, do you really think it's necessary?" Raven studied him carefully before answering. "Captain, you've spent your entire career being the strongest person in the room. Today you discovered that strength isn't always about physical dominance or intimidation tactics. The question is whether you can adapt your leadership style to account for that knowledge." "I want to try," Reynolds said sincerely. "I want to be better than I was an hour ago. That's the first step. The second is understanding that real strength often comes disguised as weakness, that the most dangerous enemies are the ones who don't look threatening, and that respect has to be earned through actions rather than demanded through rank." Patterson checked his watch, a reminder that even legendary encounters had to conform to military schedules. "Ma'am, what's the timeline for your evaluation report? Preliminary findings will be transmitted within 24 hours. Full assessment with recommendations will follow within 72 hours. However, Colonel, I should mention that this facility is only the first of several scheduled for evaluation." How many facilities? All of them. The implications were staggering. Every SEAL team, every Special Operations unit, every classified installation would be subjected to the same kind of surprise evaluation. The ripple effects would transform how the entire Special Operations community approached security, training, and personnel selection. Professional legal knowledge regarding military benefits and veteran rights was becoming increasingly important. Specialized legal courses focusing on military law and veteran advocacy were gaining popularity. These educational programs, taught by experienced military law experts and former officers, helped ensure all rights and benefits were properly protected and advocated for. "Ma'am," Sarah interjected, "there's one more thing. The biometric scan triggered an additional alert I've never seen before. The system is requesting authentication for something called Ghost Protocol Reactivation. It's asking for command authorization codes. Raven nodded as if this were expected. Colonel Patterson, you have those codes? Patterson's eyebrows rose. I do. Check your classified message traffic from this morning. You should have received a priority communication from Joint Special Operations Command. Patterson pulled out his secure phone, scrolling through encrypted messages with growing confusion that transformed into comprehension and then concern. Here it is. Ghost Protocol Authorization 77 Alpha. Validate identity confirmation for operational reactivation. The message was sent at 0600 hours, but I never... He trailed off, understanding dawning. You knew this would happen. You knew exactly how this interrogation would unfold. I've been planning this evaluation for months, Colonel. Every possible scenario was mapped out, every contingency accounted for. The only variable was how quickly your people would piece together the truth. Reynolds felt a mixture of admiration and unease. So, our reactions, our decisions, you predicted all of it? Human behavior follows patterns, Captain. Military personnel especially so. Training creates predictable responses, and stress reveals character. Your initial aggression was anticipated, as was Master Chief Williams's recognition protocol and Officer Martinez's procedural compliance. She gestured around the room with her cuffed hands. Even this conversation was planned. The only question was whether you would learn from the experience or simply rationalize your failures. Jackson spoke up. And our verdict? Mixed results. Captain Reynolds showed adaptability and willingness to accept criticism, positive indicators for future leadership potential. Officer Martinez followed proper procedures but needs enhanced training and classification verification. Master Chief Williams demonstrated excellent situational awareness and appropriate deference to command structure. She looked directly at Sarah. Technician Williams showed initiative and proper reporting protocols. Her quick thinking and attention to detail potentially prevented a significant security breach. Sarah beamed at the praise, clearly proud to have contributed positively to such an important evaluation. So, what happens now? Reynolds asked. Now you implement the lessons learned. Security protocols are updated, training programs are revised, and personnel are educated about the evolving nature of threats facing this country. Most importantly, you remember that assumptions can be deadly in our line of work. Patterson began entering the authorization codes into Sarah's tablet, each keystroke confirming the reality of what they'd experienced. The screen flashed green, displaying text that made everyone in the room straighten unconsciously. Ghost Protocol activated. Operational status reactivated. Agent designation. Ghost 01. Clearance level. Alpha 00. Mission authority unlimited. Ma'am, Patterson said formally, on behalf of SEAL Team 6 and the United States Navy, I officially recognize your reactivation status and acknowledge the authority of Ghost Protocol. Raven nodded acknowledgement, then did something unexpected. She held up her cuffed hands and looked pointedly at Reynolds. Captain, I believe these are no longer necessary. Reynolds fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking slightly as he unlocked the handcuffs. The metallic click of the cuffs opening seemed unnaturally loud, marking the end of one phase of the encounter and the beginning of something entirely different. Raven rubbed her wrists where the metal had left slight indentations, then stood slowly. For the first time since entering the room, she was free to move, and her entire demeanor shifted. The submissive prisoner vanished, replaced by someone who commanded respect through presence alone. Gentlemen, Technician Williams, she said, her voice carrying new authority, thank you for your participation in this evaluation. Your responses have been noted and will be included in my official report. She moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. Captain Reynolds, a word of advice. The next time you draw your weapon on someone, make sure you're prepared for the possibility that they might be more dangerous than you are. Yes, ma'am, Reynolds replied, and meant it. Master Chief Williams, maintain your current standards. They serve you well. Thank you, ma'am. Officer Martinez, request enhanced clearance for threat assessment protocols. You'll need it for future situations. I'll submit the paperwork immediately, ma'am. Technician Williams, excellent work on the database analysis. Consider applying for intelligence specialist training. Thank you, ma'am. I will. She reached for the door handle, then paused one final time. Oh, And gentlemen, next time might not be an exercise. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving the four of them alone with the magnitude of what they'd experienced. The interrogation room felt different now, larger somehow, as if her presence had been compressing the space around them. Reynolds sank into his chair, emotionally and physically exhausted. Did that really just happen? It happened, Jackson confirmed, and now we have to figure out what it means. Patterson was already making notes on his tablet, documenting the encounter for official reports. This changes everything. If Ghost Protocol is truly reactivated, it means there are threats out there serious enough to warrant bringing back operators who are officially dead. What kind of threats? Sarah asked. The kind that keep generals awake at night, Patterson replied grimly. Martinez had been unusually quiet during the final exchanges, but now he spoke up with obvious concern. Sir, if there are other operators like her out there, conducting similar evaluations, how many of our installations might be compromised? All of them, Reynolds said quietly, finally understanding the full scope of what they'd witnessed. She said this was just the first evaluation. Every SEAL team, every special operations unit, they're all going to be tested. Jackson nodded slowly. And the ones that fail won't get a second chance. The implications were staggering. The entire special operations community was about to undergo the most comprehensive security evaluation in its history, conducted by operators whose very existence was classified beyond most people's clearance level. So, what do we do? Sarah asked. Patterson set down his tablet and looked around the room at each of them in turn. We learn, we adapt, we get better, because if Ghost 01 is back in the field, it means the threats we're facing are serious enough to warrant bringing back the dead. He stood up, straightening his uniform in a gesture that somehow restored normal military bearing to the situation. This briefing is classified at the highest levels. Nothing discussed here leaves this room without explicit authorization from JSOC Command. Is that understood? Yes, sir, came the unanimous response. Good. Now, let's figure out how to make sure we pass the next test. As they filed out of the interrogation room, Reynolds caught sight of his reflection in the two-way mirror. The man looking back at him appeared older somehow, marked by an experience that had fundamentally changed his understanding of what it meant to serve his country. Outside in the corridor, there was no sign of Ghost 01. She had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed, leaving behind only the memory of a voice that warned them the next time might not be an exercise. Reynolds touched the empty holster at his hip and wondered how many other assumptions he'd been carrying that might prove equally dangerous when tested against reality. The answer, he suspected, was more than he wanted to know, but he was going to find out anyway, because that's what soldiers did. They adapted, they overcame, and they protected their country against all enemies, even the ones hiding in plain sight, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to reveal that everything you thought you knew was wrong. In the distance, an alarm sounded, not the harsh klaxon of a security breach, but the subtle chime that indicated a priority message arriving through classified channels. Patterson checked his secure phone, and his face went pale. What is it? Reynolds asked. New orders, Patterson replied, his voice tight with concern. Ghost Protocol evaluations have been accelerated. The next facility is being tested tomorrow. Which facility? Patterson looked up from his phone, meeting Reynolds' eyes with an expression that mixed anticipation and dread. All of them, simultaneously. The corridor seemed to grow colder as the implications sank in. Somewhere out there, more ghosts were stirring, preparing to test the defenses of America's most elite military units. And now, Reynolds and his team knew exactly how unprepared they all might be. The game had changed, and the rules were written by people who didn't officially exist, enforced by standards that defied conventional understanding, and graded on a curve that measured success by survival. Welcome to the new reality of special operations, where the most dangerous enemy was the one you never saw coming, and the greatest threat was assuming you knew what danger looked like. The hunt for weakness had begun, and the hunters were ghosts with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The priority message from JSOC Command had arrived with the subtle chime that indicated classified traffic, but its contents were anything but subtle. Patterson stared at his secure device, reading the encrypted text for the third time, as if repetition might somehow change its meaning. Simultaneous evaluations across all SEAL facilities commencing at 0600 hours tomorrow, he read aloud, his voice tight with barely controlled tension. Ghost Protocol operatives have been deployed to Coronado, Little Creek, Pearl Harbor, and Stennis. Expected duration, 72 hours. Failure rate projections, 60 to 80%. Reynolds felt his stomach drop. 60 to 80% failure rate? What happens to the facilities that fail? Complete restructuring, Patterson replied grimly. New command staff, revised protocols, and in extreme cases, decommissioning of units deemed unsuitable for current threat environments. Jackson ran a hand through his graying hair, the weight of decades of military service suddenly feeling heavier than usual. They're not just testing individual operators anymore. They're evaluating the entire special operations infrastructure. Martinez had been frantically taking notes on his tablet, trying to capture the full scope of what they were learning. Sir, if Ghost 01 was conducting a relatively simple infiltration assessment, what kind of tests are the other facilities facing? Before Patterson could answer, the lights in the corridor flickered once, twice, then stabilized. The brief power fluctuation was followed immediately by a subtle change in the air circulation system, barely noticeable unless you were trained to recognize such things. That wasn't a power surge, Sarah said quietly, her technician's instincts picking up on details the others might have missed. Someone just activated the facility's emergency protocols. Patterson's secure device chimed again, this time with the rapid-fire sound that indicated multiple priority messages arriving simultaneously. His face went progressively paler as he scrolled through the incoming intelligence. Coronado reports successful infiltration by unknown operative, 0 casualties, but complete security system compromise. Little Creek has gone dark. Last communication was a request for medical evacuation. Details classified. Pearl Harbor. He paused, his jaw tightening. Pearl Harbor is reporting what they're calling supernatural events that defy logical explanation. The corridor suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls were pressing in on them. The reality of what Ghost 01 represented, not just an individual operator, but part of a larger program designed to expose fundamental weaknesses in America's most elite military units, was becoming impossible to ignore. And Stennis? Reynolds asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Stennis isn't responding to communications. Satellite imagery shows normal base operations, but all electronic traffic has ceased. Jackson's expression had taken on the 1,000-yard stare of someone processing information that challenged everything he thought he understood about military capabilities. Sir, permission to speak freely? Granted. If these Ghost Protocol operatives can compromise our most secure facilities this easily, what does that say about our readiness to face actual enemy action? It was the question nobody wanted to ask, but everyone was thinking. The implications extended far beyond military embarrassment or career consequences. They spoke to fundamental vulnerabilities in national security that had gone unrecognized until now. In military environments, comprehensive financial protection systems, designed specifically for high-risk personnel, included specialized insurance packages with enhanced coverage and exclusive benefits. Long-term investment strategies and retirement planning specifically created for defense personnel featured competitive interest rates and specialized benefits. These financial frameworks protected not only the individual, but ensured family security across all scenarios, from mission-related injuries to early retirement transitions. Patterson closed his secure device and looked around at the group with an expression that mixed determination with barely controlled concern. What it says, Master Chief, is that we have 72 hours to prepare for changes that will reshape how special operations work in this country. What kind of changes? Sarah asked. The kind that separate the operators who can adapt to new realities from those who can't. Before anyone could respond, footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor, measured, purposeful steps that carried a rhythm, suggesting military training, but with something else underneath. A precision that spoke of movements calculated to be completely silent when necessary, audible now only by choice. The figure approaching them moved through patches of light and shadow cast by the overhead fixtures, and for a moment Reynolds felt his hand drift unconsciously toward his holstered weapon before catching himself. Old habits and recent lessons warred in his mind as he recognized the slight frame and distinctive gait of Ghost 01. She had changed clothes since leaving the interrogation room. Gone were the civilian garments that had made her appear vulnerable and out of place. Now she wore military fatigues that fit with tailored precision, combat boots that made no sound despite their apparent weight, and equipment that suggested capabilities far beyond standard issue. "Gentlemen, Technician Williams," she said as she approached, her voice carrying easily down the corridor despite its quiet tone. "I hope you've had time to process our earlier conversation." Patterson stepped forward, his posture automatically shifting to the bearing of someone addressing a superior officer, despite the apparent informality of the situation. "Ma'am, we've received reports about simultaneous operations at other facilities. Can you provide additional context?" Ghost 01's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes suggested she was pleased by the question. "Colonel, what I can tell you is that the evaluation process is more comprehensive than a single infiltration exercise. Each facility faces tests designed to expose their specific vulnerabilities. And the nature of those tests? Coronado is learning whether their physical security measures can withstand someone who understands their psychology better than they understand themselves. Little Creek is discovering what happens when their communications networks are turned against them. Pearl Harbor is facing threats that challenge their assumptions about what constitutes possible enemy action." She paused, studying their faces as she delivered information that redefined their understanding of current operations. "And Stennis is learning what complete isolation feels like when all electronic connectivity is severed and they must rely solely on human intelligence and decision-making capabilities." Reynolds felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Ma'am, are these exercises or are they actual operations? Captain, in our line of work, what's the difference?" The philosophical implications of her question hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. In special operations, the line between training and reality was often deliberately blurred, but this seemed to represent something entirely different, a level of testing that pushed beyond simulation into territory where mistakes had genuine consequences. Martinez looked up from his tablet, where he had been furiously documenting everything. "Ma'am, the failure rate projections mentioned in our briefing materials, what happens to personnel in units that are classified as failures? They adapt or they find new careers." The simple statement carried weight that made everyone present understand the stakes involved. This wasn't just about military efficiency or operational readiness. It was about survival in a changing world where traditional approaches might no longer be sufficient. Jackson spoke up with the directness of someone who had spent 3 decades learning to cut through bureaucratic ambiguity. "Ma'am, what do you need from us?" Ghost 01 studied him for a moment, and for the first time since her reappearance, something approaching approval flickered across her features. "I need you to understand that everything you think you know about threats, enemies, and defensive capabilities is about to change. The world has evolved while our training remained static. Our adversaries have adapted while our protocols remained predictable." She began walking slowly down the corridor, gesturing for them to follow. Her movement was casual but purposeful, leading them toward areas of the facility that weren't typically accessible to most personnel. The threats facing this country no longer announce themselves with uniforms, flags, or conventional weapons. They look like civilians, they think like soldiers, and they strike when we're focused on fighting the last war instead of preparing for the next one. They passed through several security checkpoints, each one recognizing Ghost 01's credentials automatically and granting access without question. The deeper they went into the facility, the more Reynolds realized how much of their base remained mysterious, even to personnel who worked there daily. "Ma'am," Sarah said, "during our database analysis, we discovered security protocols we didn't know existed. How extensive are the systems we don't have access to?" Technician Williams, what you discovered represents approximately 15% of this facility's actual capabilities. The remaining 85% is classified at levels that don't appear in standard documentation. They entered an elevator that Reynolds had never noticed before, despite passing this corridor hundreds of times. Ghost 01 placed her palm on a scanner that emerged from what had appeared to be solid wall, and the elevator began descending to levels that weren't shown on any facility schematic he'd ever seen. "Where are we going?" Patterson asked. "To show you what you're actually protecting." The elevator descended for what felt like several minutes, traveling far deeper underground than any official blueprints indicated. When the doors finally opened, they revealed a command center that made the surface-level facilities look primitive by comparison. Multiple large displays showed real-time intelligence feeds from around the world. Communication stations buzzed with encrypted traffic, and dozens of personnel worked at stations equipped with technology that seemed decades ahead of anything Reynolds had encountered. "Welcome to Ghost Protocol Command," Ghost-01 said. "This is where we monitor threats that don't make it into official intelligence briefings." Patterson stared at the displays showing global threat assessments, his face cycling through confusion and growing alarm. "Ma'am, how long has this facility existed?" Construction began 3 years ago, shortly after it became clear that traditional intelligence gathering was insufficient for emerging threat patterns. Full operational status was achieved 18 months ago, and we've been conducting evaluations ever since. Martinez was studying the personnel working at various stations, noting details that suggested military training, but also capabilities that went beyond conventional special operations. "Ma'am, who are these people?" "Operators who officially died in various conflicts over the past decade, but who possessed skills too valuable to lose. Each of them volunteered for continuation of service under Ghost Protocol guidelines." The implications were staggering. An entire command structure populated by officially dead operators, working on threats that weren't acknowledged by conventional intelligence agencies, operating with resources and authority that existed outside normal military hierarchies. Hold up. Before we get to the moment that changes everything, if you're on the edge of your seat right now, this is your last chance to hit that like button. What's about to happen will blow your mind, and you'll want to come back and watch this again. "Sir," Reynolds said, addressing Patterson but looking at Ghost-01, "what's our role in all this?" "Your role, Captain, is to decide whether you can adapt to new realities or whether you represent a security liability that needs to be contained." The words hit like cold water. Despite the respect and apparent approval she'd shown during their earlier interactions, Ghost-01 was making it clear that their continued service wasn't guaranteed. They were still being evaluated, and the stakes were higher than they'd initially understood. "What kind of adaptation?" Jackson asked. Ghost-01 led them to a briefing area where classified documents were spread across a large table. Maps, photographs, intelligence summaries, and tactical assessments painted a picture of global threats that bore little resemblance to the information presented in standard military briefings. "The kind that requires you to think beyond conventional paradigms," she replied, gesturing toward the materials. "Study these assessments. Tell me what you see." Reynolds approached the table first, scanning documents that detailed terrorist networks, state-sponsored infiltration operations, and cyber warfare capabilities that seemed to blur the line between science fiction and operational reality. "These threat assessments," he said slowly, "they're describing capabilities that shouldn't be possible with current technology." "Shouldn't be possible or shouldn't be publicly acknowledged?" Martinez joined Reynolds at the table, his intelligence training helping him process the information more quickly. "Ma'am, if these assessments are accurate, then our current defensive postures are completely inadequate." "Correct. Which brings us to the real purpose of today's evaluation." Ghost-01 activated a large display screen that showed live feeds from the other SEAL facilities currently undergoing evaluation. The images were disturbing, not because they showed violence or destruction, but because they revealed the ease with which supposedly secure installations could be compromised. At Coronado, a figure in civilian clothes walked through restricted areas without challenge, security personnel seemingly unaware of the intrusion, despite multiple camera angles showing the breach clearly. At Little Creek, communication systems displayed error messages while personnel struggled to understand why their encrypted networks were broadcasting their own classified conversations back to them on open frequencies. Pearl Harbor's feed showed something that defied immediate explanation: equipment malfunctioning in patterns that suggested external control, personnel reporting phenomena that shouldn't be possible, and an atmosphere of controlled panic as traditional troubleshooting protocols proved completely ineffective. "The Stennis feed isn't available," Ghost-01 explained, "because that facility is currently operating under complete electronic isolation. They have no external communications, no satellite connectivity, and no access to digital resources of any kind. Their evaluation focuses on decision-making capabilities when stripped of technological advantages." Sarah stared at the displays with the fascination of someone whose entire career had been built around understanding electronic systems. "Ma'am, how are these compromises being achieved?" "Through exploitation of assumptions," Technician Williams. "Each facility is being attacked through weaknesses they didn't know they possessed, using methods they didn't know were possible." She manipulated the display controls, zooming in on specific aspects of each operation. Coronado's personnel are ignoring the intruder because their pattern recognition training teaches them to look for specific threat indicators. The operative knows those indicators and is specifically avoiding them while accomplishing objectives that should be impossible under normal circumstances. The feed shifted to Little Creek. This facility's communication networks are being used against them through exploitation of protocols they installed for security purposes. Their own defensive measures have been converted into attack vectors. Finally, the Pearl Harbor display. And this installation is learning that their understanding of possible enemy capabilities has been artificially limited by classification systems designed to protect sensitive information. They're facing demonstrations of technologies that exist but aren't acknowledged in their briefing materials. Patterson studied the feeds with growing comprehension and concern. "Ma'am, these aren't exercises in any conventional sense. These are proof-of-concept demonstrations showing that our most secure facilities can be compromised at will." Exactly. And the question now is whether the personnel at those facilities, and here, can adapt quickly enough to remain relevant in a changing operational environment. Jackson approached one of the workstations where an operator was monitoring global communication intercepts. The screens showed message traffic in languages and formats he didn't recognize, analyzed by systems that seemed to understand patterns invisible to human observation. "Ma'am," Jackson said, "what happens to personnel who can't adapt? They're reassigned to positions where their limitations won't compromise national security, training commands, administrative roles, civilian contractor positions, places where traditional thinking isn't a liability." Reynolds felt his career hanging in the balance. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd sacrificed to achieve, could be swept away based on his ability to accept and internalize concepts that challenged his fundamental understanding of military service. "What do we need to do?" he asked. Ghost 01 studied him for a long moment, her blue eyes seeming to weigh his sincerity against his capabilities. "First, you need to stop thinking about enemies as them versus us, and start thinking about threats as known versus unknown. The most dangerous adversaries are the ones who don't fit your preconceptions about what adversaries look like." She moved to another display showing global threat assessments that painted a picture of interconnected challenges spanning multiple domains: physical, digital, psychological, and economic. Second, you need to understand that security isn't about building walls strong enough to keep enemies out, but about building awareness sophisticated enough to recognize enemies who are already inside. The philosophical shift required was enormous. Instead of focusing on defensive measures designed to repel external threats, they needed to develop capabilities for identifying and neutralizing threats that had already bypassed traditional security measures. Third, you need to accept that the most effective operations are the ones that look like routine activities. The best infiltrations appear completely normal. The most successful intelligence-gathering operations go unnoticed, and the deadliest attacks often come from sources that seem friendly. Martinez looked up from the intelligence summaries he'd been studying. "Ma'am, if these principles are correct, then how do we distinguish between actual threats and false positives? How do we maintain operational effectiveness without becoming paralyzed by suspicion?" It was an excellent question that got to the heart of the challenge facing modern special operations. Ghost 01's expression showed approval for the analytical thinking behind the inquiry. "Ist-an inquiry?" "Officer Martinez, that's exactly the right question. The answer lies in developing intuition, sophisticated enough to recognize patterns that conscious analysis might miss." She activated another display showing training scenarios that seemed to blend elements of traditional military exercises with psychological assessment and advanced technology integration. Traditional military training focuses on conscious decision-making processes. Analyze the situation, consider options, select the best course of action, execute, and assess results. That approach works well for conventional threats operating within predictable parameters. The display showed scenarios where conventional decision-making processes led to mission failures, despite technically correct execution of established protocols. But unconventional threats exploit the time lag inherent in conscious decision-making. By the time you've analyzed the situation and selected an appropriate response, the threat has already adapted and moved to a new phase of operation. She paused, letting the implications sink in. Effective counter-unconventional operations require development of subconscious pattern recognition, capabilities that can identify and respond to threats faster than conscious thought processes. Sarah was studying the training scenarios with the focus of someone trying to understand completely new concepts. Ma'am, how do you develop subconscious pattern recognition? Through exposure to scenarios that challenge your assumptions about what's possible, followed by immediate feedback about the accuracy of your intuitive responses. Traditional training teaches you to think your way through problems. This training teaches you to feel your way through situations where thinking takes too long. Understanding military law and veteran benefits was becoming increasingly crucial. Specialized legal education focusing on military jurisprudence and veteran advocacy was gaining widespread adoption. These educational programs, instructed by experienced military law specialists and former officers, ensured comprehensive protection and advocacy for all rights and benefits. The briefing area fell silent as everyone present struggled to process the implications of what they were learning. The entire foundation of their military training was being redefined in real time, replaced by approaches that seemed to blend traditional tactical thinking with almost mystical concepts about intuition and subconscious awareness. Reynolds broke the silence with a question that probably should have occurred to him earlier. Ma'am, why are you telling us all this? Why reveal classified programs and secret facilities to personnel who might not pass your evaluation? Ghost 01's expression shifted slightly, showing something that might have been amusement or approval. Captain, you're asking exactly the right questions now. The answer is that this conversation is part of your evaluation. Your responses to classified information, your ability to process paradigm shifts, your reactions to challenges to established thinking, all of it is being assessed. The weight of continuous evaluation was beginning to feel oppressive. Every word, every question, every reaction was being analyzed and judged according to criteria they didn't fully understand. But more importantly, Ghost 01 continued, you've already demonstrated adaptability by accepting information that contradicts your previous understanding. Many personnel never get past the denial phase when confronted with evidence that their training is insufficient for current threats. Patterson had been unusually quiet during the extended briefing, but now he spoke up with the authority of senior command. Ma'am, what's the timeline for implementation of these new training protocols? Implementation began 18 months ago, Colonel. What you're seeing now is the evaluation phase to determine which existing personnel can transition to new operational paradigms and which need to be reassigned to positions better suited to their capabilities. And the criteria for those determinations? Psychological flexibility, intuitive awareness, adaptability under stress, and ability to operate effectively when conventional protocols prove inadequate. Jackson approached the display showing the live feeds from other facilities, studying the ongoing operations with new understanding. Ma'am, are the operatives conducting these evaluations also testing these new capabilities? Master Chief, every Ghost Protocol operative is simultaneously testing the evaluation targets and being tested themselves. The threats we face require constant adaptation, and anyone who stops learning becomes a liability, regardless of their previous accomplishments. The philosophical implications were staggering. Even elite operators who had proven themselves capable of extraordinary achievements under conventional parameters needed to continuously evolve or risk becoming obsolete. Martinez was taking detailed notes, his intelligence training helping him recognize the broader strategic implications of what they were witnessing. Ma'am, how extensive is the Ghost Protocol program? How many operators, how many facilities, how many ongoing operations? Ghost 01 considered the question carefully before answering. Officer Martinez, what I can tell you is that Ghost Protocol represents the military's adaptation to 21st century realities. The scope is classified, but the impact will reshape how special operations function across all service branches. She gestured toward the command center around them, where dozens of personnel continued working on projects that remained mysterious despite their obvious importance. Every person working in this facility represents capabilities that don't exist in official military documentation. Every operation being monitored addresses threats that haven't been publicly acknowledged. Every evaluation being conducted determines whether existing personnel can contribute to national security under current conditions or whether they represent vulnerabilities that need to be contained. The magnitude of the program was becoming clear. This wasn't just about improving training or updating protocols. It was about fundamentally transforming how the military understood and responded to modern threats. Before anyone could ask additional questions, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. Not the harsh klaxons that indicated immediate threats, but the subtle chimes that suggested significant developments requiring command attention. Ghost 01 moved immediately to one of the communication stations, where an operator was receiving priority traffic from multiple sources. The conversation was brief and conducted in code phrases that meant nothing to Reynolds but clearly carried significant meaning for Ghost 01. When she turned back to address the group, her expression had shifted to something more serious and focused. "Gentlemen, Technician Williams, the evaluation phase has been accelerated. Pearl Harbor has requested immediate assistance. Little Creek has declared a facility-wide emergency, and Coronado is reporting what they're calling supernatural phenomena that require expert analysis." Patterson stepped forward. "Ma'am, what kind of assistance?" "The kind that requires personnel who can think beyond conventional limitations and operate effectively in situations where standard procedures don't apply." She moved toward equipment lockers that contained gear unlike anything in standard military inventory. Advanced communication devices, weapons that seemed decades ahead of current technology, and protective equipment that suggested threats beyond conventional understanding. "Your final evaluation begins now. You'll be deployed to assist with the ongoing operations at other facilities, where your performance will determine whether you're suitable for continued service under Ghost Protocol guidelines." Reynolds felt his pulse accelerate. "Ma'am, what kind of threats are we likely to face?" "The kind that will test everything you think you know about what's possible." As if on cue, another alarm sounded, this one with the urgent tone that indicated immediate action required. Ghost 01 moved with practiced efficiency, gathering equipment and issuing rapid-fire instructions to personnel throughout the command center. "Captain Reynolds, you'll be deployed to Pearl Harbor to assist with technical anomalies that are challenging their operational capabilities. Master Chief Williams, you're going to Coronado to provide tactical assessment of infiltration techniques that appear to violate known physical laws." She continued issuing assignments with the precision of someone who had planned for multiple contingencies. "Officer Martinez, you'll support Little Creek's communication analysis efforts. They're dealing with intelligence that suggests enemy capabilities beyond current threat assessments. Technician Williams, you'll remain here to coordinate information flow between all facilities." "Ma'am," Patterson said, "what about command structure? Who's in overall control of these operations?" Ghost 01 paused in her equipment preparation, meeting his eyes directly. "Colonel, you're about to learn that some operations require authority that transcends normal military hierarchies. The threats we face don't respect organizational charts, and our responses can't be limited by bureaucratic constraints." The command center around them had transformed into something resembling a war room, with personnel coordinating multiple simultaneous operations, while displays showed real-time intelligence updates from around the globe. "Your transportation is already being prepared," Ghost 01 continued. "Mission briefings will be provided en route. Remember that everything you've learned here is classified at the highest levels, and your performance during these operations will determine your future service options." She handed each of them communication devices that looked like standard military equipment but felt different, heavier, more sophisticated, with interface elements that suggested capabilities beyond conventional radio systems. "These devices will keep you connected to Ghost Protocol Command regardless of local communication disruptions. Use them for situation reports, request for assistance, and emergency extraction if necessary." Reynolds examined the device, noting details that spoke of advanced technology integrated into familiar packaging. "Ma'am, how do we know what constitutes an emergency in situations where we don't understand the baseline parameters?" "Captain, you'll know. Trust your instincts, adapt to circumstances, and remember that the most important mission objective is gathering intelligence about enemy capabilities that we didn't know existed." Jackson was checking his own equipment with the methodical precision of someone who had prepared for countless missions. "Ma'am, what if the threats we encounter are beyond our ability to handle?" "Master Chief, your job isn't to handle them. Your job is to survive them long enough to report back what you've learned." The distinction was sobering. They weren't being sent out to solve problems or neutralize threats. They were being deployed as intelligence-gathering assets whose primary mission was observation and analysis rather than direct action. Before anyone could ask additional questions, Ghost 01 did something that fundamentally changed the entire situation. She reached for the collar of her military uniform and began removing it with efficient movements that suggested someone changing clothes for a specific purpose. "Ma'am," Patterson said, confused by the sudden action, "what are you doing?" "Showing you something that will help you understand the scope of what you're dealing with." Underneath the military uniform, she wore a simple black t-shirt that fit closely enough to reveal details that had been concealed by the looser clothing. As she folded the uniform and set it aside, the movement caused the t-shirt to shift, revealing more of her left shoulder where the hint of tattoo had been visible earlier. But this wasn't just a glimpse of black ink. This was something that demanded attention and commanded respect from anyone who understood its significance. Starting at her shoulder blade and extending down her upper arm was a masterwork of military tattoo artistry. A flame rendered in intricate detail, but not just any flame. This was a specific design that incorporated elements recognizable to anyone with sufficient military knowledge. The flame was composed of individual tongues of fire, each one containing symbols and text that told a story of service, sacrifice, and capabilities that transcended normal human limitations. Military unit designations, operation codes, and symbols that represented achievements in classified missions blended together in a design that was both beautiful and terrifying. At the base of the flame, barely visible unless viewed from exactly the right angle, were 6 small symbols that looked like graves markers. Each one bore initials that corresponded to the teammates she had lost during Operation Neptune's Fork, a permanent memorial to warriors who had died under her command. But it was the text woven throughout the flame design that made everyone in the room understand they were in the presence of something extraordinary. Ghost 01 appeared in stark military lettering, followed by operation names that didn't appear in any official records, casualty numbers that spoke of missions beyond normal comprehension, and dates that covered a span of service extending far beyond what any conventional operator could survive. The silence that followed was absolute. This wasn't just military body art. This was a historical document etched in flesh, a record of service that existed outside official documentation, but carried weight that made conventional medals and ribbons seem insignificant by comparison. Jackson was the first to find his voice, and when he spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "Holy cow, that's not just a tattoo, that's a complete service record." Ghost 01's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes suggested this revelation had been planned as carefully as everything else they had experienced. "Master Chief, this tattoo represents 15 years of operations that don't appear in any official database. Every symbol, every date, every designation represents missions accomplished and prices paid in service to this country." She turned slightly, allowing them to see additional details that had been concealed by the angle of her positioning. The flame design extended further than initially visible, incorporating elements that spoke of service and conflicts that hadn't been publicly acknowledged, and operations that challenged the boundaries of what was considered possible. The flame itself represents the fire that burns inside every true warrior, the willingness to sacrifice everything for something larger than yourself. But the specific design elements represent capabilities that can only be earned through experience that most people couldn't survive. Reynolds studied the tattoo with growing comprehension and awe. "Ma'am, how many people carry markings like this?" "Captain, what you're looking at is unique. Every Ghost Protocol operative earns their own design based on their specific service record and capabilities. No two are identical, and each one represents a level of achievement that can't be replicated through conventional training." Martinez had his tablet out, documenting what he was seeing with the thoroughness of someone who understood the historical significance of the moment. "Ma'am, is this why the other facilities are reporting supernatural phenomena? Are they encountering operatives with similar capabilities?" "Officer Martinez, what they're encountering are people who have been pushed beyond normal human limitations and have discovered that those limitations were more flexible than conventional thinking suggested." She began putting her uniform back on, but the impact of what they'd seen couldn't be concealed by clothing. The knowledge that they were in the presence of someone who represented the absolute pinnacle of military achievement and who had transcended normal understanding of what military achievement meant changed everything about how they perceived their situation. "The deployments I mentioned are still happening," Ghost 01 said as she finished adjusting her uniform. "But now you understand that you're not just being sent to assist with technical problems or unusual situations. You're being sent to learn what becomes possible when conventional limitations are exceeded." Patterson checked his watch, noting that time was passing rapidly, despite the enormous amount of information they'd processed. "Ma'am, how long do we have to prepare?" "Your transportation leaves in 15 minutes. Preparation consists of accepting that everything you think you know is incomplete, and remaining flexible enough to adapt when reality exceeds your expectations." The command center around them continued buzzing with activity as personnel coordinated multiple ongoing operations. But now, Reynolds understood that they weren't just observers. They were about to become participants in something that would either elevate their capabilities to new levels or reveal that they weren't suited for service in a world where the impossible had become routine. "One last question," Jackson said. "Ma'am, what happens if we fail these final evaluations?" Ghost 01 met his eyes directly, her expression showing the weight of someone who had seen too much and lost too many friends to sugarcoat difficult truths. "Master Chief, failure in conventional military operations means mission objectives aren't achieved. Failure in Ghost Protocol operations means you don't come back." The words hung in the air like smoke from discharged weapons, carrying implications that went far beyond career consequences or professional disappointment. They were about to enter territory where mistakes had permanent consequences and where the price of inadequacy was measured in more than just lost opportunities. "But," Ghost 01 continued, "success means you become part of something that protects this country from threats that most people can't imagine and couldn't survive if they encountered them." She moved toward the exit, gesturing for them to follow. "Your choice, gentlemen, traditional service with predictable challenges and conventional rewards, or Ghost Protocol service with unlimited challenges and rewards that redefine what service to country means." As they followed her toward whatever transportation was waiting, Reynolds realized that this wasn't just about military careers anymore. This was about choosing between two fundamentally different approaches to life: the safety of known limitations or the dangerous freedom of unlimited potential. The elevator ride back to surface levels passed in silence, each person processing the magnitude of what they'd experienced and what they were about to face. When the doors opened, they found themselves in a different part of the facility than where they'd started, a section that looked like a transportation hub designed for rapid deployment of personnel and equipment. 3 military vehicles waited, each one modified with equipment that suggested capabilities beyond standard transportation. Personnel in unmarked uniforms were making final preparations, their movements efficient and purposeful, but without the rigid formality of conventional military operations. "Captain Reynolds," Ghost 01 said, gesturing toward the first vehicle, "your Pearl Harbor team is ready for departure. Officer Martinez, Little Creek Transportation is the second vehicle. Master Chief Williams, Coronado Deployment is the third." She handed each of them sealed packets containing what appeared to be mission-specific briefing materials. "These contain everything we know about the situations you'll be entering. Study them during transport, but remember that conditions are evolving rapidly and your briefings may be obsolete by the time you arrive." Patterson approached Ghost 01 with the bearing of someone requesting final guidance before a critical mission. "Ma'am, what's our primary objective? Intelligence gathering, threat assessment, personnel evaluation, Sammanhängstörung. Colonel, your primary objective is to survive contact with realities that challenge everything you've been trained to expect. Everything else is secondary." She stepped back, allowing them to move toward their respective vehicles. But before they could board, she called out one final instruction that would stay with them throughout whatever followed. "Remember that courage isn't about being unafraid. Courage is about recognizing that some things are more important than fear." If this story gave you goosebumps and made you believe in never judging a book by its cover, there's another incredible story about a janitor who shocked an entire military base. Click the video appearing on your screen right now. You won't believe what happens next. As the vehicles departed the facility, carrying them toward confrontations with the unknown, Reynolds opened his briefing packet and began reading about phenomena that defied rational explanation but demanded immediate response. The Pearl Harbor situation involved equipment malfunctions that suggested external control by systems that shouldn't exist, personnel reporting sensory experiences that contradicted instrument readings, and command decisions being influenced by information that appeared to come from sources with impossible knowledge of classified operations. His job was to determine whether they were facing technical failures, psychological warfare, or something that transcended both categories. The vehicle's communication system activated, connecting him to Ghost Protocol Command through the device he'd been given earlier. Ghost 01's voice came through clearly despite the encrypted transmission. Captain Reynolds, status report. En route to Pearl Harbor, reviewing briefing materials. Ma'am, the situations described in these documents, they don't seem possible according to known science. Captain, the impossible becomes routine when you accept that known science represents only a fraction of actual reality. Your mission is to document what you encounter, not to explain it according to existing paradigms. The communication ended, leaving Reynolds alone with briefing materials that described a world where the boundaries between possible and impossible had been deliberately blurred by adversaries who understood those boundaries better than the people trying to defend against them. As the miles passed, he found himself thinking about the tattoo they'd seen, about the operations represented by symbols that didn't appear in official records, and about the implications of serving in a world where the most important missions were the ones that never officially happened. Meanwhile, at the other facilities, Jackson and Martinez were having similar conversations with Ghost Protocol Command, receiving similar reassurances that their missions involved documenting rather than explaining phenomena that challenged conventional understanding. But at the Underground Command Center, Ghost 01 was dealing with developments that made the individual facility evaluations seem like minor concerns. Ma'am, Sarah Williams reported from her monitoring station, we're receiving intelligence that suggests coordinated enemy action against all SEAL facilities simultaneously. This isn't just evaluation exercises anymore. We may be looking at actual hostile operations using our own testing protocols as cover. Ghost 01 studied the intelligence summaries with growing concern. The pattern of activities at each facility showed characteristics that went beyond training scenarios or capability demonstrations. Someone was using the Ghost Protocol evaluations as opportunities to gather intelligence about American Special Operations capabilities. Technician Williams, initiate Protocol 77 Alpha immediately. All deployed personnel need to be warned that they may be entering genuine hostile territory. Ma'am, what's Protocol 77 Alpha? The protocol that assumes our evaluations have been compromised by enemy action and that our personnel are now operating in actual combat situations without conventional backup or support. Sarah's hands moved rapidly across her communication controls, sending priority alerts to Reynolds, Jackson, and Martinez, warning them that their situations had escalated beyond training exercises. Ma'am, Sarah said, all teams acknowledge the protocol change, but Captain Reynolds is reporting that his Pearl Harbor briefing materials didn't include contingencies for actual combat operations. Ghost 01 moved to the main command console, where displays showed real-time tracking of all deployed personnel, along with intelligence assessments that painted an increasingly concerning picture. Patch me through to all teams simultaneously. Channel open, ma'am. All Ghost Protocol personnel, this is 01. Be advised that your current operations may have transitioned from evaluation exercises to actual hostile contact. Enemy forces may be using our testing protocols to mask infiltration and intelligence gathering operations. She paused, allowing the implications to sink in before continuing. Your mission parameters remain unchanged. Survive and report. But understand that survival now requires treating all anomalous phenomena as potentially hostile, regardless of apparent explanation. Jackson's voice came through from the Coronado deployment. Ma'am, are you saying that the supernatural events being reported are actually enemy weapons demonstrations? Master Chief, I'm saying that the distinction between supernatural events and advanced enemy capabilities may be less important than your ability to survive contact with either. Martinez joined the conversation from his Little Creek approach. Ma'am, what kind of backup can we expect if situations deteriorate? Officer Martinez, you are the backup. Ghost Protocol operates beyond conventional support structures specifically because conventional responses are inadequate for the threats you're facing. The weight of complete isolation was settling over all of them. They were entering situations that challenged their understanding of reality without backup, without conventional weapons or equipment, and with mission parameters that prioritized observation over action. All teams, Ghost 01 continued, remember your training and trust your instincts. The enemy capabilities you encounter may seem impossible, but they're not supernatural. They're just more advanced than what we've previously acknowledged. As the communications ended, Sarah looked at Ghost 01 with obvious concern. Ma'am, what if they encounter threats beyond their ability to handle? Then they become casualties in a war that most people don't know we're fighting. The stark reality was that Ghost Protocol operations existed precisely because conventional military responses were insufficient for modern threats. The personnel being deployed represented the best available options for gathering intelligence about enemy capabilities that transcended traditional understanding. "Ma'am," Sarah said, "incoming priority intelligence from National Security Agency. They're reporting communication intercepts suggesting that hostile forces have been planning coordinated operations against all SEAL facilities for months." Ghost 01 studied the new intelligence with growing alarm. The sophistication of the planning, the precision of the timing, and the apparent knowledge of Ghost Protocol procedures suggested enemy capabilities that were far more advanced than previous assessments had indicated. "Technician Williams, what's the source reliability on this intelligence?" "NSA rates it as highly credible, ma'am. Multiple independent sources confirm coordinated planning by adversaries with detailed knowledge of our operational procedures." "And their assessment of enemy capabilities?" Sarah consulted her displays before answering. "Ma'am, NSA classifies the enemy capabilities as beyond current threat assessment parameters. They're recommending immediate escalation to highest alert levels across all Special Operations commands." Ghost 01 made a decision that would reshape how the entire situation was handled. "Initiate Ghost Protocol White Phoenix. All evaluation exercises are now classified as active combat operations. All deployed personnel are authorized to use any means necessary for survival and mission completion." "Ma'am, what's White Phoenix authorization?" "The authorization that removes all conventional restrictions on our personnel and gives them access to capabilities that don't exist in standard military documentation." Sarah's hands paused over her controls as she processed the implications of what she was being asked to implement. "Ma'am, are you authorizing them to use classified weapons and equipment that might expose advanced military capabilities to enemy observation?" "Technician Williams, I'm authorizing them to survive. The exposure risk is acceptable compared to the intelligence value of personnel who can report back what they have encountered." The authorization went out immediately, reaching Reynolds, Jackson, and Martinez as they approached their respective targets. The message was brief but comprehensive. Conventional restrictions lifted, classified equipment authorized, mission priority shifted to survival and intelligence gathering by any means necessary. At Pearl Harbor, Reynolds felt his communication device vibrate with the new authorization codes. When he accessed the additional equipment lockers that became available with White Phoenix clearance, he found weapons and protective gear that seemed decades ahead of anything he'd encountered during his conventional military service. At Coronado, Jackson received similar access to equipment that challenged his understanding of what was possible with current technology. Weapons that seemed to operate on principles he didn't recognize, communication devices that apparently worked regardless of conventional signal interference, and protective equipment that felt too light to be effective, but seemed to offer protection against threats he couldn't identify. At Little Creek, Martinez discovered that his intelligence-gathering equipment now included systems capable of analysis beyond anything in his previous experience. Devices that could intercept and decrypt communications in real time, sensors that could detect threats through methods he didn't understand, and computer systems that seemed to anticipate his analytical needs. But even as they gained access to capabilities that exceeded their understanding, the fundamental challenge remained the same. They were entering situations where enemy capabilities might exceed even these advanced resources. The final phase of their journey to each facility passed in preparation and anticipation that bordered on meditation. Each of them understood that they were about to encounter realities that would either expand their understanding of what was possible or exceed their ability to comprehend and survive. At Ghost Protocol Command, Ghost 01 monitored their approach while coordinating with intelligence agencies that were rapidly revising threat assessments based on incoming data about enemy capabilities. The war they were fighting wasn't just about territorial control or conventional military objectives. It was about the future of human conflict, where the boundaries between possible and impossible had become weapons in themselves, and where survival required adaptation to realities that most people couldn't imagine. As the first reports began coming in from the deployed teams, it became clear that everything they thought they knew about modern warfare was about to change forever. And in the depths of the underground command center, Ghost 01 prepared for the possibility that some of her personnel might not be coming home, not because they lacked courage or skill, but because they were facing enemies who had redefined what winning and losing meant, in conflicts that transcended traditional understanding. The evaluation was over. The war had begun. The final reports would either reshape how America defended itself against 21st century threats, or they would serve as warnings about capabilities that had surpassed human ability to counter. Either way, the world was about to discover that some soldiers never really die. They just find new ways to serve and new enemies to face in wars that exist beyond the boundaries of conventional understanding. The Ghost Protocol had been activated not just as an evaluation tool, but as a survival mechanism for a nation that was about to learn what it really meant to face the impossible. And somewhere in the shadows between what was known and what was feared, other ghosts were stirring, preparing for conflicts that would determine whether human innovation could keep pace with human imagination, or whether the future belonged to those who had learned to weaponize the impossible itself. The mission continued, even as the definition of mission expanded beyond anything that had been previously contemplated by minds that still believed in the comforting certainty of limitations. In the end, only the ghosts would know whether they had saved their country or simply documented its transformation into something unrecognizable. But they would know, and they would remember, and they would continue serving long after official records had classified their existence as impossible. Because that's what ghosts do. They persist beyond the boundaries of what the living think is real, and they protect what matters most from threats that most people never see coming. The evaluation was complete, the future was beginning, and it looked nothing like what anyone had expected. The first situation reports began filtering back within hours, each one challenging fundamental assumptions about what constituted possible enemy action. Reynolds reported from Pearl Harbor that equipment failures weren't technical malfunctions, but coordinated responses to external commands transmitted through frequencies that shouldn't exist. Jackson's initial assessment from Coronado described infiltration techniques that appeared to violate known physical laws, but followed logical patterns once conventional limitations were abandoned. Martinez's intelligence from Little Creek painted the most disturbing picture of all: enemy forces that seemed to anticipate American responses before they were implemented, suggesting access to decision-making processes at levels that should have been completely secure. But perhaps most significantly, all three teams reported the same underlying pattern: adversaries who understood American military capabilities better than Americans understood their own limitations. At Ghost Protocol Command, Ghost 01 studied the incoming data with the satisfaction of someone whose worst fears were being confirmed through evidence rather than speculation. The evaluations had revealed not just individual facility vulnerabilities, but systemic weaknesses in how the entire special operations community conceptualized modern threats. "Ma'am," Sarah said, monitoring communication traffic from all deployed teams, "they're requesting guidance on engagement protocols. Standard rules of engagement don't seem to apply when the enemy capabilities exceed our understanding of what's possible." Ghost 01 considered the request carefully. The personnel she'd deployed represented some of the finest military minds in the country, but they were encountering realities that required entirely new approaches to conflict resolution. "Tell them," she said finally, "that the only rule that matters now is survival. Everything else is negotiable."
Behind every uniform is a person trying their best, seeing each other with respect. Thank you for being here. Don't forget to subscribe to TNG Story.